The mule had wandered up to the trough. When I saw her crumpled against the fence rail, half in shadow, one bare foot raw and bleeding. Her leather dress was torn near to nothing, skin burned deep by the sun. I couldn't tell if she was breathing until I stepped closer, the dry wind lifting her hair just enough to show her lips move. For a long moment I stood there with my hand on the rifle, torn between walking away and taking her inside. Out here, a stranger meant trouble, but she wasn't going to last another night in this heat. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and tap like and subscribe if you've ever faced a moment where one choice could change the rest of your days. I've been keeping to myself on this stretch of the Salt River for 6 years now. I'm Matthew Rohr, Missouri born, raised in a small farmhouse where work started before daylight and ended when the last chore was done. My father ran the plow and taught us that a man's word was the one thing he couldn't buy back once it was spent. My mother kept the Sabbath, even if it meant the bread came out of the oven before sunup so the kitchen could rest on Sunday. We didn't have much, but there was always enough to share with a traveler at the table, so long as he came in peace. After the war, I drifted west, carrying more scars than I cared to explain, and a limp that came and went with the weather. Work on the frontier taught me to mend my own gear, fix a fence with whatever nails I had left, and keep the rifle clean, even on the days I never fired it. My cabin sits low between bluffs and mesquite, a good 2 miles from the nearest wagon trail. Most folks with money stayed in town these days, drawn to the noise of the railroad and the shine of new storefronts. Out here I kept the old ways, growing a patch of beans, hauling water from the river, trading hides when I needed flour or coffee. It's a different world than the one booming in town. Their land changes hands with a handshake between speculators who never dirtied their boots. Prices are talked over whiskey in the saloon, while men like me are out fixing fence posts under the noon sun. I never minded the split. They could have their money. I'd keep my quiet. That was the bargain I thought I'd struck with life, until that August morning when trouble came limping into my yard. I remember the stillness, most no birds, no breeze, just the sound of my own boots in the dust as I crossed to her. The wounds on her thigh and side told me she'd been running from something far meaner than the heat. In the West, someone always owns the trouble that finds you, and sooner or later they come to collect. I bent to lift her, feeling how light she was under the sunburn and blood. Inside, I cleared the cot and reached for my whiskey bottle, the sewing needle strips of clean cloth. By the time I stitched the last wound, the sun was sliding down behind the ridge, and the air smelled of mesquite smoke. She hadn't spoken a word, just breathed slow under the blanket. I sat back, knowing the night would bring questions I wasn't sure I wanted the answers to. When dawn touched the cabin walls, I saw her eyes open, sharp dark, watching me like she was weighing what kind of man I was. She didn't speak, and I didn't press her. Out here, trust isn't given in a single morning. But I could feel the ground shift under my feet all the same, like the first roll of thunder before a summer storm. And that was before I noticed the boot tracks out by the ridge. The boot tracks I'd spotted near the ridge the day before stayed on my mind. They weren't mine, and they sure weren't hers. 2 sets, maybe a third. Faint one pressed into the dry crust of dirt where the wind hadn't yet swept them clean. Whoever they were, they'd come close enough to see the smoke from my chimney. That was too close to be chance. Inside, Sana lay on the cot, the blanket pulled high. Her eyes followed me as I stepped in, but she didn't speak. I poured her a tin cup of water and set it in her hands. She drank without looking away, her gaze steady, like she was waiting to see if I'd mention what I'd found. I didn't. Instead, I pulled a chair near the door and began oiling my rifle, the metal catching what little light filtered through the boarded window. The next morning brought a heavy stillness to the air, the kind that made sound travel farther than it should. Coyotes yipped from beyond the bluff, and the mule paced the fence line like it had caught a scent. Sana sat propped against the wall, her bandaged thighs stretched out, mending slow but clean. She accepted the strip of cornbread I handed her and ate with both hands, small bites chewing careful. It was near midday when she finally spoke more than a word. Her voice was rough, halting, but clear enough. 3 white men, she said. They kill my uncle. Shoot my brother. Tie my hands. Say sell me south. She said it plain, without a tremor, her eyes fixed on some place far from here. I cut rope in the night. Run many days. No food. She looked down at her hands, the skin across her knuckles scraped raw nails, cracked. I asked how far she'd come, and she only shook her head. The way she'd staggered into my yard told me it was farther than most could make on their feet. I didn't press her. Out here, a person told what they could carry in words, and the rest they carried in silence. By late afternoon, I'd checked her bandages, again tightened the stitching where it had loosened, and left a fresh jar of willow bark paste by the cot. She surprised me then by asking, "You soldier?" I told her I had been Union Scout, Missouri and Texas. Her eyes studied me a long moment before she asked, "Kill many?" I nodded once. "Too many." She didn't ask more. That evening, the sky turned the color of old copper, and the air cooled just enough to sit on the porch. I kept my chair angled toward the ridge. Sana came to the doorway, leaning on the frame for balance. She didn't hide the limp or the torn state of her dress anymore. She stepped out slow, the boards creaking under her bare feet, and stood beside me without speaking. When I rose at dawn the next day, I found her standing near the table, holding herself steady with one hand on the edge. "I stay?" she asked. I looked at her, the bruises along her arms, fading the set of her jaw, strong, even in the pale light. "You're here now," I said. She nodded like it was what she'd expected to hear, but needed said out loud. We began working in quiet rhythm. I boarded the remaining windows, from the inside hammered loose planks back into place, and set the rifle within reach of the door. She watched every move I made, then reached for a hammer herself. Her hands were unsteady at first, but she kept going until the nails bent from use. By the time the sun sat low, the cabin felt tighter, safer though. Both of us knew it was only a start. That night I woke to the sound of hoofbeats, slow measured, carrying in from the south. I moved to the window, rifle ready, and saw 2 riders coming along the fence line. No lanterns, no talking. Sana came to stand beside me, her blanket pulled close. "They come for me," she said. I didn't look away from the glass. "Then they'll leave with lead." She touched my wrist briefly. "Do not die for me." I answered, "I'm not dying for you. I'm staying." "That's different." The riders stopped less than 100 feet from the porch. One dismounted, the other held both reins. I stepped out far enough to be seen keeping the rifle leveled. The man on foot wore a long coat and a polished belt buckle that caught the moonlight. "Empty hands," he called. "Don't want trouble. Heard you were keeping company that don't belong to you." "She stays because she wants to," I told him. His mouth curled at the edge. "She's wanted. Tribal bounty, escaped custody. Property taken during trade. You interfere, it becomes your problem." The second rider reached slow for his saddlebag. I thumbed the hammer back, "Move your hand again," and he's dead. He froze. The first man smiled thin. "You really want to die over an Apache?" I said. "I've died over worse." A stretch of silence passed, broken only by the mule's restless snort. Finally, he lowered his hands. "We'll be back," he said. "Next time, we don't talk first." They rode off slow and deliberate, not in retreat, but in promise. Inside, Sana shut the door behind me. "You knew they come." I nodded. "And you still stayed. I told you I would." She stepped closer, her eyes searching mine. "They won't stop. If you keep me, they burn it down." I said, "Then we rebuild." She shook her head. "You don't owe me this." I told her I'd spent enough years hiding and letting things happen. She reached out, resting her hand on my arm, and didn't pull away. That night the wind dropped and the land went still. We lay in separate beds, but the space between us felt smaller than it had the day before. Somewhere out past the ridge, two men were making their plans. In the quiet, I could hear Sana's breathing steady and sure, and I knew the waiting was nearly over. The days after that first standoff passed without another rider in sight, but the stillness felt thin, like a skin stretched over something moving underneath. Sana walked more each day, her limp easing though the wound on her thigh stayed bound in clean strips of cloth. She kept to the table or the cot, watching as I worked her eyes, tracking every nail I drove into the planks over the windows. One morning I laid out the Colt revolver I kept under the cot, the wood grip worn smooth from years of use. I showed her how to open the loading gate, check each chamber, and seat the cartridges. She handled it steady, her fingers quick. No fumbling. "You ever fire one of these?" I asked. She nodded once. When they came the first time, she didn't say more and I didn't press. By the end of that week, I'd set trip lines out near the ridge, just enough to rattle a tin if someone passed through after dark. Sana followed me part of the way, leaning on a stick I'd cut to her height. She moved quiet, scanning the brush with the same measured caution I'd seen in seasoned scouts. When I knelt to tie a length of wire to a low mesquite branch, she stayed behind me, eyes on the trail, like she could feel the wind shift. That night, the moon rode high and bright, throwing silver across the yard. We sat inside the fire down to coals. She braided her hair, the long black rope of it falling over her shoulder as she worked. Her face had lost some of the sharp hollows from before her skin warming with color again. After a long silence, she spoke, her voice low. "My mother died when I was small. My uncle raised me. My brother, he laughed at everything." She paused, fingers tightening in the braid. "They shot him first, just for speaking." I sat still, letting the words hang. She set the braid aside and met my eyes. "You kill them if they come back." I told her, "They'll never leave." It wasn't a boast, just a fact. She nodded once, like she understood exactly what that meant. 2 mornings later, a dust storm came in from the east, carrying grit that scratched the windows and turned the sky the color of ash. We worked inside, shifting crates and tools so the floor stayed clear. I kept the rifle close to the door, the Colt in my belt. She moved from one side of the room to the other, her dress still torn at the side, though she no longer seemed to notice. By late afternoon, the wind dropped as quick as it had come. The air was too quiet, after the kind that made sound travel far. That evening, she stood at the doorway beside me as the sun slid behind the ridge. "You live alone long time," she said. I told her since the war. She asked if I had family. "A brother," I said. "Didn't make it." She studied my face. "Wife," I shook my head. "Never trusted anyone enough to stay." She stepped closer, her shoulder brushing mine. "I stay. Not because I must, because I choose." That night we slept without the wall of space between us. I kept my bedroll beside the cot, her breathing close enough to hear. Around midnight, hoofbeats came again, slower this time, and we rose together. I looked through the window slit. 2 riders, same as before, one with a lantern turned low. Sana pulled the blanket around her shoulders, the revolver in her hand. "Do not die for me," she said. I answered, "I'm not dying for you. I'm staying." They stopped just beyond the fence, not speaking, only the leather creak of their saddles and the shuffle of hooves in the dirt. The one who'd spoken before dismounted, hat low, long coat brushing his boots. I stepped onto the porch. Sana stayed just inside, her silhouette still in the glow from the hearth. "You're on my land," I said. His voice came smooth, practiced. "Heard you were keeping company that don't belong to you." I told him she stayed because she wanted to. His lip twitched. "She's wanted. Property taken in trade. You keep her, it's your problem." The man on horseback reached down toward his side. I thumbed back the hammer on the rifle. "Move that hand again, and you won't draw breath to regret it." He froze. The man on foot gave a thin smile. "We'll be back. Next time we don't talk first." I kept the rifle up until they rode back into the dark. When the sound of hooves had faded, I stepped inside. Sana shut the door behind me, her hand still on the revolver. "They come again," she said. I nodded. She stood there a moment longer before placing the Colt on the table. "Then we finish it." Her words were quiet, but her eyes were fixed like she was already looking toward that day. The day after the riders left, the air felt heavier, as if the land itself was bracing for what might come. I kept the rifle near at all times and moved through the cabin, making small repairs that could matter later. Sana was already on her feet when I came back from checking the water barrel. She'd swept the floor and set a pot near the fire, her hair tied back, her movements slow but certain. By mid-morning, I laid out the supplies I wanted within reach. Extra cartridges for both the rifle and the Colt. A coil of rope, the skinning knife I kept honed to a clean edge. She joined me without being asked, sorting the rounds into neat rows. "You think they come soon?" she asked, not looking up from her hands. "I know they will," I said. Her eyes flicked to mine, and she nodded once, going back to her task. Later that day, I took her outside to the edge of the yard. I showed her the warning lines I'd strung, thin wire tied to tin scraps that would clatter if someone crossed them after dark. She crouched to check the knots, her fingers working quickly despite the healing wound. I handed her the rifle and talked her through the aim and set of the trigger. She adjusted her stance, without a word, the barrel steady. That evening, a wind came up from the south, carrying with it the dry smell of mesquite. We sat near the doorway, watching the light fade across the bluff. She broke the quiet. "When they took me, they said I would be worth something. Not for work, for trade." Her voice was even, but her gaze stayed fixed on the distance. I didn't speak, letting her finish. "One night I burned the rope, took a knife. I killed one before I ran. I took the rifle from her lap and set it beside the door. You did what you had to." She met my eyes, held them a moment, then looked away. The firelight from inside cut a warm line across her cheek, and I knew she'd carry that night with her, no matter what came next. The following morning, the air was sharp and still. I made another round to the traps and came back with nothing worth skinning. Sana was in the yard walking slow circles to keep her legs strong. She stopped when she saw me and nodded toward the ridge. "Tracks," I shook my head. "Not today." But we both knew that didn't mean much. That afternoon, I showed her where I'd buried a small box of ammunition under the hearthstone. She memorized the spot and asked no questions. We worked in near silence, the scrape of wood against wood the only sound between us. By sundown, the sky turned the pale yellow that comes before a cold night. She stepped to the porch beside me, her shoulder brushing mine. "If they come, we fight," she said. I nodded. We fight. We turned in early, though neither of us expected to sleep. I lay listening to the wind shift the mule's soft movements near the fence, the faint tick of the tin warning lines. Around midnight, the sound I'd been waiting for came, hoofbeats, steady and close. Sana was already up, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders and taking up the rifle. Through the slit in the window, I saw them. 2 riders again, moving without haste. One dismounted, the other stayed in the saddle, holding both reins. I eased the door open and stepped out, the cold air settling on my face. "You're on my land," I called. The man on foot, Fisk, looked up from under the brim of his hat. "We came for what's ours," he said. "She's not yours," I told him. "She stays because she wants to." His mouth twisted into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You keep her, it's your trouble." "Won't be the first time I've taken back what was claimed." The rider in the saddle moved a hand toward his coat, and I leveled the rifle at him. "Don't," I said. He froze, and Fisk's smile faded. "This isn't done," he said. "Next time we won't waste words." I kept the rifle steady until they turned their horses and rode back into the dark. Inside, Sana set the rifle on the table. "Soon," she said. I nodded. There wasn't anything else to add. She stood there a long moment, her hand resting on the back of the chair before turning toward the fire. I watched her in the shifting light, knowing the waiting was over the next time we saw them. One way or another, it would be finished. The next day, the cabin felt smaller, though nothing had moved. Sana kept to the hearth, sewing a fresh hem into the skirt of her torn dress, while I worked at the table cleaning the rifle and checking the cylinder on the Colt. The air outside was still no bird call from the trees and no stir from the mule. That kind of quiet made me keep glancing toward the ridge. By mid-morning, I stepped out to check the wire alarms strung along the trail. Each line was where I'd left it, the tin scraps hanging steady in the dry breeze. On the way back, I spotted a scuff in the dirt, a partial boot print near the creek bed. The heel was worn down on one side. I didn't linger. Instead, I covered the last 100 feet to the cabin at a brisk walk. Sana was standing when I came in, watching my face. "Tracks?" she asked. I nodded. "Close." We spent the rest of the morning setting the cabin for a fight. I shifted the heavy crates against the inside of the door to make a barricade and tightened the nails on the window boards. Sana moved quietly beside me, fetching tools, keeping her hair tied back out of her face. She didn't ask how many I thought we'd be facing. She knew well enough it didn't take many. That afternoon, I brought out the hatchet and set it on the table. She ran her hand over the handle, then began sharpening the edge with a small whetstone. The rasp of steel filled the room, steady and sure. When she asked, "Soon," I said. She kept sharpening until the blade caught the lamplight clean. As the sun dipped low, we ate a plain supper, cornbread and beans, and left the plates where they sat. Sana tied back her hair again and slung the rifle across her lap as she took a seat by the window. I stayed near the door, my hand resting on the Colt. Neither of us spoke. The light outside turned from gold to a pale blue that settled over the land like frost. The sound came just after dusk, 2 sets of hoofbeats closing fast. Through the gap in the boards, I saw them crest the rise. Same men as before. The one on the bay mare, Fisk, was in front. His partner trailed close behind, riding with one hand on the reins and the other low near his hip. They didn't slow until they were less than 30 feet from the cabin. "Stay inside," I told Sana. She didn't move from her chair, but her grip on the rifle tightened. I stepped out onto the porch, rifle raised. Fisk reined in, smiling like the ride down had been a casual visit. "She's mine," he called. I came to collect. "She's not a thing to be collected," I said. "You turn around now." His smile faded. Not without her. His partner started to draw. The crack of Sana's rifle split the air before he cleared leather. The man toppled from the saddle, clutching his shoulder and hitting the dirt with a muffled curse. Fisk swung his pistol toward the cabin, but I'd already dropped to a knee. My shot caught him in the leg just above the boot, and he went down hard. The bay mare sidestepped, snorting at the sudden burst of noise. I kept the rifle on Fisk as I closed the distance. "Drop it," I said to his partner, who was struggling to get up. He let his revolver fall into the dust. I kicked it away, then looked down at Fisk. His face was twisted in pain, but his eyes stayed fixed on me. "You come back again, I bury you here," I told him. He spat into the dirt. "She's not worth it." I crouched so he could hear me clear. "She's worth more than you'll ever be." I backed away, keeping the rifle steady until they mounted again. Fisk leaning on his partner's stirrup for balance. They turned south without another word, disappearing into the dark. Inside, Sana was still by the window, the rifle across her knees. Her hands were shaking now, but her eyes were steady. I set the rifle against the wall and took her by the shoulders. "You're all right?" I said. "I shot him," she answered, her voice raw. You did what you had to. Her knees gave out then, and I caught her easing her down to the cot. She didn't cry, just leaned into my chest, breathing deep. Outside, the night settled heavy again, the last echoes of hoofbeats fading into the hills. The fight had been short, but it had changed the air between us. We'd stood together, and neither of us had turned away. By morning, the light through the chinks in the wall carried no warmth. The air had the clean bite of a night wind still clinging to the dirt. Sana was already awake, sitting on the edge of the cot, with the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. I poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in her hands, and sat across from her. She didn't mention the fight, and neither did I. The day passed in steady work. I gathered the spent shell casings from the yard and buried them behind the shed, then mended the porch rail where Fisk's partner had crashed against it. Sana fed the mule and checked the garden rows we'd planted before the trouble started. She paused once, a hand against her middle, and I asked if she was hurt. "No," she said. "Just feels strange." That evening, as I washed the tin plates in the basin, she stood by the table and said it without looking at me. "I miss bleeding. 2 moons now." I dried my hands slow and came closer. "You think?" She shrugged. "Maybe." We sat side by side on the cot. She leaned into my shoulder, calm but sure in the way she said, "I thought I couldn't." After what they did. They told me I couldn't. I didn't ask who they were. I'd heard enough to know. "You're safe now," I said. "Whatever comes, we stay." She nodded, her head still against me. Later, we sat outside under a light wind, the lamp between us casting a soft circle on the porch. She told me her full name, Sonnet Tenney, given by her mother before fever took her. Her people lived near the Salt Cliffs, though she hadn't seen them in 2 winters. "You ever want to go back?" I asked. She was quiet a long time. "They think I'm dead." Inside, she laced her fingers with mine as we lay down. There was no urgency between us, just warmth and quiet skin after too many cold years. When we made love, it was slow, steady, unhurried, more a claim than a rush. She didn't look away, and neither did I. We drifted to sleep, tangled in the same blanket, the night holding still around us. Spring came early along the Salt River. The air softened, and the coyotes kept their distance. The fence line stood repaired, and a row of stakes held wash drying in the sun. Sana's belly had begun to round, and she'd started sewing new cloth into the seams of her dress. She worked barefoot on warm days, her hair tied back with a strip of leather, moving with the easy purpose of someone who belonged where she stood. I was splitting kindling when I saw her pause at the doorway, hand resting on her hip. "Tired?" I asked. "Some." I set the axe aside and pulled out a chair. "Then rest." She gave me a half smile, but sat. "You always this bossy," I said. "Only when I'm right." She reached for my hand without asking. "I want the baby born here." I told her I wasn't planning to take her anywhere else. That evening, we sat with her feet in my lap as I rubbed her calves, careful of the old wound on her thigh. "We should build another room," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "For the baby," I nodded. "And for you. I figure you'll want space when you get tired of me." She laughed, low and real. "If I didn't leave after you burned the beans twice, you're stuck with me." Near sundown, a shadow came along the southern path. I stood and rested my hand on the revolver. But the man walking toward us had open hands and long braids down his shoulders. Behind him came 3 more, 2 women and a younger man. Sana stepped forward, her breath catching. "Elder Tanaka," she said. Then to me, "My people." Tanaka greeted her in Apache, and she embraced him. Then the women, one of whom wept softly. He approached me with a gaze that weighed its words. "You found her? Gave her life again?" I nodded. "By our law, she belongs to you because you saved her." I looked at Sana and said I don't own her. Tanaka nodded once. Then she belongs with you, same thing. They offered to take her back, but she refused, gently. I've made home here, she said. But I will visit. My child should know where I come from. The next morning we stood at the fence watching them go. Sana turned to me. We'll build that extra room soon, she said. I answered, we will. 3 months later, the evenings had cooled enough that we kept the windows cracked to let the air drift through. The extra room was halfway done, its frame standing clean and straight against the western sky. Sana moved slower now, her belly full and round beneath the altered dress she'd been wearing since early spring. She still helped where she could, handing me nails, holding the ladder steady, but I made her stop when the work ran too long. The baby came just after sundown on a night washed in pale gold. Sana labored quiet, her breath steady, her grip on my hand, turning my knuckles white. She never screamed, only leaned her forehead against mine when the pain tightened. When the cry came, it was strong and sure. A girl, warm, small, alive. Sana held her like she'd been waiting every day of her life for that moment. She's ours, she whispered. We named her Alana after Sana's mother. I built a small cradle from leftover pine, setting it near the bed so Sana could reach over without rising. The days after were slow and close. Sana nursed the baby, I kept the fire steady, and we both learned the shape of her sounds, the soft murmurs, the sudden cries, the small sighs that meant she'd settled. The land beyond our fence went on with its own rhythm. The garden grew tall beans, climbing the stakes, squash spreading low. No riders came down from the ridge. Word had traveled, I figured, and the sort of men who once rode this way now gave it a wide berth. One afternoon, as I was stacking cut wood under the porch, Sana came to the doorway with Alana in her arms. The baby's dark eyes followed the light moving across the yard. She likes the sun, Sana said. I set down the last log and came to stand beside them, brushing sawdust from my hands before touching the baby's small back. We began to speak more about the future. Sana wanted to take Alana to meet her people once she was old enough for the journey. She should know where she comes from, she said, rocking the baby against her shoulder. I told her we'd go when she was ready. That night, after we put Alana down, we sat on the porch with mugs of coffee cooling between our hands. The wind was light, carrying the faint scent of mesquite from somewhere beyond the river. We've made a home here, Sana said, almost to herself. I looked at the half-built room, the garden, the fence line, and nodded. The following week, Elder Tanaka came again, this time alone. He brought a small carved rattle wrapped in soft buckskin, a gift for Alana. He sat with us a while, speaking quietly with Sana in her language. When he left, he placed a hand on my shoulder. You keep them safe, he said. Always. I promised I would. The days settled into a steady pattern, mornings with the garden and livestock, afternoons working on the room, evenings with the baby asleep between us. But every so often I'd catch Sana glancing toward the ridge, her face unreadable. I knew she hadn't forgotten the men who once claimed they'd be back. Neither had I. It was late one afternoon when the air shifted the way it does before a storm. I was finishing the roof frame when Sana stepped out, Alana in her arms. Wind's changing, she said. I looked toward the horizon. The light was different, flatter, the colors dulled. It wasn't just weather that made the air feel that way. The change in the air proved true. 2 riders came from the ridge just before dusk, their shadows stretching long in the fading light. Sana stood inside with Alana, the lamp unlit, while I waited at the gate. The men slowed when they saw me, rifles still sheathed, but their eyes hard. They asked after Sana, their voices clipped. I told them she was my wife now, and the child in our home was mine as much as hers. One shifted in the saddle, muttering something low to the other, but neither dismounted. I didn't move from the gate. After a long pause, they turned their horses and rode back the way they came, their shapes swallowed by the dark. The sound of hooves faded until only the night wind remained. I went inside and found Sana rocking Alana, her face calm but her shoulders easing when she saw me. From then on, no one came down from the ridge again. The half-built room became a full one with a bed for Alana when she grew. The garden doubled in size, the beans climbing higher, the squash spreading wide. Sana taught me her people's songs, soft and low in the evenings, and Alana learned to walk on the same dirt we worked side by side. Years later, I sometimes still thought of those riders and the life Sana had before. But the strength in her eyes, the way she stood with her daughter in her arms, told me all I needed to know. We had built something here, not just walls and a roof, but a place where no one could claim her or me or the child we raised together. The land will always test a person. It will strip away what's weak and leave only what's meant to last. And sometimes, if you hold steady through the worst of it, you find more than you ever thought you could keep. That's the thing about the West. It's not the fences or the deed in your hand that make a home. It's the people you choose to stand beside when the wind turns cold. If you've ever known what it is to guard your own piece of peace, or to find family where you least expected it, then you already understand the heart of this story.